What if I told you that history did not begin 6,000 years ago, but hundreds of thousands of years earlier? That long before Egypt, before Babylon, even before the Bible, there was a record carved into clay, a record saying that kings once ruled the earth for 200 years. This isn't a story whispered in the shadows. It's written line by line in the Sumerian king list, one of the oldest surviving texts in human history. 8 rulers, their reigns measured not in decades or centuries, but in time periods so long they are longer than all of recorded civilization. And then suddenly the story ends with a single sentence: the flood swept over. How could ancient writers have invented numbers so exact? Were these kings truly human or something else? The Anunnaki, those who came from the heavens. And if their legacy was real, what did they leave behind in us? Tonight we open the clay tablets. We step into the age before the flood, and we ask the forbidden question: did humanity once live under the rule of gods? Before cities rose, before writing had ever been carved into clay, there were kings. Not kings in the way we understand them today, but beings said to rule for tens of thousands of years. The Sumerian king list begins with this statement: when kingship descended from heaven, it was in Eridu. A statement both simple and amazing. A claim that rulership itself was not invented but delivered. This is where our story begins, with a mysterious list found on clay prisms buried beneath the ruins of Mesopotamia. It is known to scholars as the Weld Blundell, prism named after Herbert Weld Blundell, who paid for the expedition that dug it up in Larsa in 1922, and later gave it to the Ashmolean Museum in 1923. For those who read the words, however, it is nothing less than a challenge to everything we believe about time, about history, and about the beings who once walked this earth. Imagine a tablet not large, barely 8 inches tall, inscribed on all 4 sides in a precise wedge-shaped cuneiform. The text is steady, official, not poetic. It is not a myth. It does not wander. It lists rulers, their cities, and the number of years they reigned. And yet when one follows the columns downward, the numbers stop making sense. 28,000 years for one ruler, 36,000 for another, 43,000 for a third. 8 rulers in total before the Great Flood. And together they ruled not for centuries, not for thousands of years, but for 200 years. To the modern mind, it is crazy. No human can live so long. No dynasty can stretch across those huge periods of time. And yet the same tablet continues past the flood, listing rulers whose reigns are shorter, believable, and able to be proven. Kings like Gilgamesh of Uruk, who appears not only in this list but in epic poems and archaeological layers. If the later half of the king list is trustworthy, why should we dismiss the earlier half? This puzzle sits at the heart of the Sumerian mystery. Before the flood, kings with lifespans beyond imagination. After the flood, kings we can prove with our shovels and brushes. Between them, a single dividing line. Then the flood swept over. Scholars, of course, have offered explanations. They say the first kings are symbolic, that the numbers are allegories, cycles of time disguised as reigns. But if that is true, why are the figures so exact? Why do they line up with a unit the Sumerians called the Sar, 3,600 years? A base number in their mathematics. Alulim, the first king, ruled for 8,800 years, exactly 8 Sars. Alalgar II for 36,000 years, exactly 10 Sars. Enmenluana the third for 43,200 years, exactly 12 Sars. The pattern is deliberate. It is not a random exaggeration, and so we find ourselves with a choice. To treat the list as metaphor, a clever storytelling device from a people 5,000 years gone, or to take it seriously, to ask whether there truly was an age before the flood when kingship was not human at all. The Anunnaki, the shining ones, appear in the background of this question. For some researchers, the king list is not evidence of myth but evidence of their legacy. If kingship descended from heaven, was it in fact handed down by beings who came from the sky? If lifespans stretched into tens of thousands of years, were these rulers truly human? Or were they something else? Something more, governing in flesh yet not bound by our limits of time? Consider the context. Around the world, civilizations told stories of rulers who lived impossibly long lives. In the Bible, Adam lives 930 years, Noah 950. In Hindu tradition, the Satya Yuga extends for ages beyond counting. In Egyptian king lists, Reigns also stretch into the thousands. Different languages, different lands, but the same idea. Before a flood, rulers lived in huge periods of time. After the flood, life became shorter. What happened at that boundary? Was there a change in the earth itself? A change in human biology? Or was there simply a veil drawn over memory, so that only fragments remained? As we step into this journey, we will walk city by city, king by king, from Eridu, the first city, to Bad Tibera, the city of metal, from Larak, now lost, to Sippar, where one king was said to rise into heaven itself. We will meet Alulim, Alalgar, Enmenluana, Enmengalana, Dumuzid, Ensipad Zidana, Enmendarana, and finally Ubaratutu, the last king before the waters came. 8 names, 8 reigns, together 200 years. But we will not stop there. Beyond the flood lie new kings, mortal spans, and the figure of Gilgamesh, bridging myth and history. Beyond Sumer lie echoes in the Bible in Egypt and India. And beyond the scholars lie Zechariah Sitchin, who dared to suggest that the Anunnaki were flesh and blood visitors from a planet called Nibiru. His work remains controversial, but his question stays. If the king list is not myth, then who were these kings and whose legacy do we still carry? For now, let us stay with that clay prism in Nippur, a small humble object, words pressed into wet clay over 4,000 years ago. Words that tell us of a time when gods ruled Earth, for longer than our entire civilization has existed. Words that end sharply with the line, "Then the flood swept over." It is here that our journey begins. In the ruins of Nippur, beneath the dust of thousands of years, archaeologists uncovered fragments of clay that would shake the foundations of history. They were not statues or weapons, not jewelry or pottery. They were humble tablets, prisms of clay no taller than the span of a hand, yet pressed with signs that carried secrets of rulers long before the flood. This artifact, known today as the Weld Blundell Prism, is one of the most mysterious documents ever recovered from the cradle of civilization. Imagine the scene in the early 1900s. Teams of scholars digging among the broken walls of Mesopotamia in what is now southern Iraq. The city of Nippur was a sacred place long abandoned, once dedicated to Enlil, one of the chief gods of Sumer. The ground was dry, cracked, yet beneath it lay thousands of clay tablets waiting to speak again. Among them a prism, 4-sided, each side inscribed with the wedge-shaped writing known as cuneiform. At first glance it was just another administrative record, yet the names it listed. The Weld Blundell Prism is small, but its voice is huge, written around 2100 BCE. It preserves traditions that reach back thousands, even tens of thousands of years before. The scribes did not write in the tone of legend. They wrote with precision, with columns and lists, the style of office workers recording taxes or trade. But instead of bushels of grain or herds of cattle, what they listed were kings and the lengths of their reigns. The text begins with Eridu, the first city. When kingship descended from heaven, kingship was in Eridu. The words are plain, but the claim is extraordinary. Kingship, the right to rule, was not invented by human hands. It came down from heaven. The first ruler was Alulim, who reigned for 2,800 years. Then Alalgar, who reigned for 36,000. Then Enmenluana, 43,200. One after another, the numbers climb and astonish until the total for the first 8 kings reaches 241,200 years. Scholars were stunned. How could the ancients record such figures? Some argued that the numbers must be symbolic, representing lunar months or cycles of festivals. Others dismissed the list as pure myth, no more trustworthy than the tales of dragons or giants. But the mystery deepened because the same tablet that speaks of 43,000-year reigns also mentions kings we know to be real. Gilgamesh of Uruk, for example, appears on the king list. His existence is supported by archaeology, his epic carved into tablets, his city unearthed brick by brick. If part of the list is historically accurate, why not the rest? It is as if the prism presents us with 2 worlds. The first before the flood, where rulers lived as if time itself bent around them. The second after the flood, where reigns became shorter, human verifiable. The dividing line is sharp. Then the flood swept over. No explanation, no extra details, just a cosmic reset after which nothing was the same. The prism is not unique. Copies of the king list appear on other tablets, some discovered in different cities, written in slightly different versions, but all carrying the same core story. This was not a lone fantasy of one scribe. It was a tradition shared across Sumer, retold and recopied for centuries, and all of them agree. Before the flood, 8 kings ruled for more than 200,000 years. Consider the math. A unit called the Sar equals 3600 years. The reigns in the king list are counted in exact multiples of Sars. 12 Sars, 10 Sars, 8 Sars. To the Sumerians, these were not random exaggerations. They were cycles, cosmic measures, patterns that tied earthly rule to the rhythm of the heavens. In their world, numbers were not just quantities. They were symbols of divine order. If we read the list this way, a new possibility opens. Perhaps these reigns are not metaphors at all, but records of beings whose lives truly did stretch across cycles of thousands of years. Beings whose biology, or perhaps technology, allowed them to last far beyond our span of flesh. And perhaps, this is why later interpreters from Zecharia Sitchin to modern researchers have seen in the prism the shadow of the Anunnaki, the ancient shining ones said to descend from the stars. Still, the prism itself remains quiet. It does not tell us who these kings were, only their names and their spans. It does not argue. It does not persuade. It simply lists. And sometimes the quietest documents are the most powerful. The discovery of the Weld Blundell prism was not celebrated at first. It was a scholar's curiosity, another piece of clay among many. Only later did the weight of its meaning spread. If taken literally, it tells us that civilization stretches back not 6,000 years as textbooks still often claim, but hundreds of thousands. If taken symbolically, it still shows us that the Sumerians carried memories of a time when rulers were closer to gods than men. In either case, the prism forces us to ask, what did the Sumerians know? What were they trying to preserve across centuries by pressing these words into clay? Was it a history handed down from their own ancestors? Or was it knowledge received from the very beings they called Anunnaki, guardians and rulers from beyond? And so a simple clay prism becomes a doorway into a world where time was not measured in decades or dynasties, but in ages of thousands of years. A world divided by a single disaster, the flood, after which all was different. A world where kingship descended from heaven, and where, perhaps even now, we live in the shadow of that descent. When kingship descended from heaven, it was said to rest first in Eridu. These are the opening words of the Sumerian king list, carved into clay 4,000 years ago, yet echoing from a memory far older. A short phrase, but one that holds an entire world view. Rulership was not born from human tribes, it was given from above. For the scribes of Sumer, kingship was not merely the right to govern, it was a sacred force, a divine thread linking heaven and earth. To rule was to be chosen by higher powers to embody cosmic order, and the words descended from heaven carry a lasting mystery. Were they meant as metaphor for divine inspiration? Or did they hint at something more literal? Beings from the skies bringing with them the structures of kingship. The stage for this moment was Eridu, remembered as the very first city. Archaeologists trace its ruins to the southern marshes of Mesopotamia, once touching the Persian Gulf. To the Sumerians, Eridu was not an ordinary settlement. It was the dwelling of Enki, god of wisdom, the birthplace of civilization. Its temples, layer upon layer, reach back to 5400 BCE, as if each generation sought to rebuild the connection between earth and heaven. The king list records that when kingship descended, Alulim was chosen as the first king. He was not elected by men, nor did he rise as the strongest warrior or wealthiest merchant. He was appointed singled out to bear the seal of heaven. His reign is recorded as 28,800 years, 8 full Sars in the sacred mathematics of Sumer. This descent of kingship marks a great divide between how modern historians explain the past and how the ancients remembered it. Historians tell us kingship arose slowly. Hunter-gatherer bands grew into villages, villages into towns, towns into cities until hierarchy formed. One man led, his sons inherited, and kingship was born. But the Sumerian tablets tell another story. Kingship was delivered. It was imposed or gifted, descending whole from above. Civilization in this memory was not a gradual invention, but a sudden intervention. This difference is huge. If kingship was natural, human history is a tale of progress. If kingship was given, history may have begun with contact, with outside hands shaping our destiny. Some interpret from heaven as mythic poetry, but others like Zecharia Sitchin took it literally. The Anunnaki, those who came from the heavens, established rulership on earth. In that view, Alalim and the kings who followed were not ordinary men, but hybrids of human and divine, their vast lifespans reflecting non-human origins. Eridu itself whispers of this mystery. Excavations reveal a sudden leap in advancement. Its earliest temple, over 7,000 years old, was carefully designed, aligned, purposeful. No crude beginnings, no trial and error. Civilization appears fully formed as though delivered whole. Why do writing, mathematics, temples, and kingship emerge in Mesopotamia as if from nowhere? The king list offers a blunt answer: because they came from heaven. For the people of Sumer, this belief gave order to a harsh world. Their lives were fragile, caught between floods and droughts, river and desert. But above them was assurance. Their kingship was eternal, rooted in heaven, not chance. Every ziggurat became a stairway to the sky. Every coronation echoed the first descent, and every transfer of kingship it was taken to Bad Tabira, to Sippar, to Shuruppak, reaffirmed that cities rose and fell, not by human might, but by heavenly command. This idea echoes far beyond Mesopotamia. In Egypt, Pharaoh was the son of Ra. In China, emperors ruled by the mandate of heaven. In the Bible, kings were chosen and anointed by God. Again and again across civilizations, the same claim appears. Rulers do not rule by chance but by heavenly right. So when we read the words "when kingship descended from heaven," we are not just reading poetry. We are touching the root of a global pattern, a belief that kingship was given, not invented. And perhaps, if the Anunnaki hypothesis holds even a fragment of truth, we are glimpsing a literal memory of beings who came down and gave humanity its first taste of organized civilization. From here, the prism names the first king, Alulim, whose reign, 2,800 years, was already longer than all of recorded history combined. In Eridu, the first city, kingship descended to earth and history began. The Sumerian king list tells us that Alulim was the first to rule, the first name written when the divine order of kingship touched humanity. His reign is said to have lasted 28,800 years. 8 full Sars in Sumerian counting, each Sar a cycle of 3,600 years. Eridu itself is no myth. Archaeologists have traced its ruins in southern Mesopotamia near the marshes that once touched the sea. Beneath its sands lie layer upon layer of temples, the earliest dating back over 7,000 years. Even in its first foundations, Eridu was not primitive. Its shrines were carefully aligned, rebuilt again and again, as though each generation sought to keep a connection with heaven alive. Alulim stands at the dawn of this story. Unlike later kings, no epics or hymns tell of his deeds. The clay prism records only his name, his city, and his years. Yet in this simplicity lies weight. He is remembered not for wars or monuments, but for being the first to embody kingship itself. In him, rulership was no longer a human invention, but a heavenly appointment. The span of his reign cannot be understood, 28,000 years, longer than all recorded history combined. If we take the number literally, Alulim could not have been an ordinary man. Was he divine? Was he one of the Anunnaki, the shining ones said to descend from the sky? Or was he a symbol of an age, a way of marking the beginning of time? The tablet does not explain. It simply states, and yet the pattern is clear. The numbers of the early kings are not random exaggerations but exact multiples of SARS. 8 SARS for Alulim, 10 SARS for Alalgar, 12 SARS for Enmenluana. The precision suggests intent. To the Sumerians, these were not fairy tales. They were measures of cosmic order, lifespans tied to the rhythm of heaven. To imagine Alulim's reign is to picture a world just awakening, marshlands stretching into the horizon, canals carved into soft earth, reed boats gliding under the sun. At the city's heart, a temple rising from the mud brick, smoke curling from altars to the god Enki, and presiding over it all, the first king, a figure who did not age as mortals do, whose presence lasted across generations. Children were born, grew old and died, yet the king remained to his people. This was proof that kingship was eternal, a gift not of men, but of gods. Perhaps that is why the king list begins with him. To the scribes of Sumer, Alulim was not merely a name. He was the symbol of civilization itself, the one who turned scattered tribes into a city, chaos into order. By placing him first, the tablets declare that kingship was always more than politics. It was cosmic, divine, a descent from heaven. His reign marked not centuries but epochs. And though his end is not described, his place is clear. He is the threshold, the first chapter in a story that would stretch through 7 more kings across 241,200 years until the flood came and washed it all away. After Alulim rose King Alalgar, the second ruler of Eridu. Where Alulim embodied the dawn, Alalgar shaped the day. His reign, recorded as 36,000 years, 10 full SARS, carried kingship from a single presence into a lasting structure. Eridu under Alalgar became more than the first city. It became the foundation of Sumerian order. If Alulim marked the arrival of authority from heaven, Alalgar established its rhythm on earth. The people remembered him not as a conqueror, but as the king who gave form to rulership, making it lasting, ceremonial, and sacred. The number of his reign is again precise, 10 SARS. To the Sumerians, 10 was a sign of completion, of wholeness. Alalgar's time on the throne thus symbolized a perfect cycle, the strengthening of kingship, the stabilization of life. He was less the warrior and more the keeper, ensuring that what began with Alulim did not fade but took root. Archaeology offers glimpses of Eridu in this age. Temples grew larger, rebuilt upon the ruins of the old, their platforms rising higher. Each new layer of brick was not just architecture but ritual, a renewal of the bond between heaven and earth. Under Alalgar, this layering became tradition, as if every rebuilding reaffirmed that kingship had not left, that it still descended unbroken upon the city. To the people who lived in those reed-walled houses, the king was no ordinary man. Generations were born, tilled the fields, raised children, and passed away, yet Alalgar still reigned. His presence became a constant, a living pillar across centuries. Imagine the awe, even the quiet fear of knowing that the same king who ruled in your grandfather's youth still sat upon the throne today. It made kingship eternal, unquestionable, a thing rooted not in men but in heaven itself. The myths do not surround Alalgar with drama, but in that silence lies meaning. His reign was remembered as steady, uneventful, enduring. Sometimes it is not the wild rulers but the quiet ones who shape civilizations most. Alalgar gave kingship its stability. He turned the spark of Alulim into a flame that would burn through ages. Across cultures we find echoes of such figures. Rulers remembered not for conquest but for order. In Egypt, Menes united the land and established continuity. In China, the sage kings created ritual and calendar. Alalgar belongs to this type, the founder of tradition, the one who ensures the divine gift becomes a lasting institution. When his reign ended, The king list does not describe his death, only that kingship moved again. It was taken to Bad Tabira, the city of the forge, where new transformations would begin. But Alalgar's role was complete. He ensured that kingship once descended would never vanish. He gave it shape, ceremony, and permanence. Thus, Alalgar is remembered not as the beginning, but as the foundation. He is the ruler who built time into kingship, who transformed it from moment into structure. Without him, the age of long-lived kings might have ended as suddenly as it began. Because of him, it lasted until the flood itself swept it away. Then kingship passed to Bad Tabira, the second great city of the pre-flood age. Here the king list records Enmen-Luwana, whose reign lasted 43,200 years, 12 full sars, longer than Alulim and Alalgar before him. His span marked the peak of an early cosmic cycle. Bad Tabira's very name hints at fire and metal. Scholars translate it as the city of the metalworkers, or the city of the forge. If Eridu was the birthplace of kingship, Bad Tabira was the birthplace of transformation. Stone gave way to metal, ritual became craft, and under Enmen-Luwana, this sacred knowledge grew. To the ancients, metallurgy was no ordinary skill. To take ore from the earth, melt it, and shape it into tools was to copy the gods themselves. Fire became the divine element, and those who mastered it were seen as keepers of cosmic power. Enmen-Luwana's long reign is thus remembered as the age when the forge of civilization was first lit. Imagine the city. Furnaces glowing red against the night. Priests tending sacred fires. Sparks flying like stars. To his people, these flames were not just practical, but holy, linking heaven's brightness with earth's labor. Every hammer strike echoed as divine thunder. Every bar of metal carried the authority of heaven. And above it all reigned Enmen-Luwana, the king who embodied this union of craft and cosmos. Why 43,200 years? The precision is telling. 12 sars represented fullness, the completion of a great cycle. Just as the zodiac spans 12 houses, Enmen-Luwana's reign spanned 12 measures of cosmic time. His rule was not only political, but heavenly, tied to the very rhythm of the stars. Some suggest that his age matches the first great advances in astronomy. Bad Tabira may have been a place not only of fire but of sky watchers. To work with metal is to understand transformation. To watch the heavens is to understand cycles. Together they mark the beginning of science itself, a gift remembered as descending from heaven. From the perspective of the Anunnaki idea, Enmen-Luwana may represent direct presence. 43,000 years is not human, but it may be natural to beings with lifespans shaped by another world. If they came to Earth to mine, to forge, to transform, then Bad Tabira would be their center. Enmen-Luwana in this view was not merely a king, but their chosen helper. And yet, like the kings before him, the records are silent about his deeds. No wars, no conquests, only his name and his years. It is as if his reign was remembered not for events but for essence, the essence of fire of creation of the long arc of time itself. When his 43,200 years ended, the king list says only that kingship continued. It would remain in Bad Tabira for another cycle under Enmen-Luwana before moving onward. But Enmen-Luwana's place is unique. He was the ruler of the forge, the king whose reign marked the flowering of transformation, the shaping of raw matter into order. After Enmen-Luwana came Enmen-Luwana, guardian of a different kind of power. His reign, the king list says, lasted 28,800 years. 8 sars echoing the same span as Alulim, the first king. If Enmen-Luwana's fire forged matter, Enmen-Luwana's light forged law, he is remembered as the keeper of the Mi, the divine laws that shaped civilization. In Sumerian thought, the Mi were more than rules. They were sacred blueprints, art, justice, wisdom, astronomy, writing, even the rhythms of kingship itself. To possess the Mi was to hold the essence of order. Myths say they were guarded by the god Enki in his temple at Eridu, but entrusted at times to rulers. Enmen-Luwana's name suggests he was one such guardian, a king whose reign was less about conquest and more about alignment with heaven's laws. Picture Bad Tabira under his rule. The forges of Enmen-Luwana still glowed, but now the sky itself was read as text. Priests charted the paths of stars, traced omens in the flight of birds, and wrote laws into clay. Society was being shaped not only by fire and craft, but by knowledge and law. To his people, Enmen-Galana embodied the wisdom that tied heaven and earth together. Why 28,800 years? 8 Sars again suggest balance, the renewal of cycles. Alulim, the first king, ruled for the same span. Perhaps the scribes wanted to mark Enmen-Galana as a second dawn. The dawn not of kingship itself, but of its laws, its structure, its sacred memory. The silence of the record, no deeds, no wars, becomes meaningful here. Enmen-Galana's reign was not about drama, but about continuity. Like the stars, steady in their courses, he represented constancy. His rule was a cosmic alignment, the age of preserving order. Cross-cultural echoes appear. In Egypt, Thoth preserved divine wisdom. In the Bible, Enoch walked with God and was shown heavenly secrets. In India, Manu received the laws of life from the gods. Enmen-Galana belongs to this same type, the ruler who carries knowledge from heaven to earth. From the Anunnaki perspective, the me could be seen not as abstract laws but as advanced instructions, technology, science, or laws of nature handed down. Enmen-Galana then would be the keeper of this inheritance, ensuring it was preserved across thousands of years. His 28,800 years symbolize the endurance of knowledge guarded through ages before the flood. Imagine generations living under his reign, children born into a world already full of ritual and law, where the patterns of the stars guided planting, festivals, and judgment. Elders telling their grandchildren that the king who ruled in their own youth still sat on the throne unchanging. To them, this was not strange. It was proof that kingship was eternal, that the laws of heaven lasted. When his reign ended, kingship remained in Bad Tibira, passing to Dumuzid the shepherd. With that shift, the story would turn toward myth, death, and rebirth. But Enmen-Galana's role was complete. He was the guardian of the me, the one who ensured that civilization was not only forged but guided, not only created but ordered. After Enmen-Galana rose, King Dumuzid remembered not just as a ruler, but as a shepherd and a figure of myth. The king list records his reign at 36,000 years, 10 Sars, another precise cycle of cosmic time. Yet unlike the silent reigns before him, Dumuzid's memory lives in hymns, sad songs, and stories that survived far beyond Sumer. Dumuzid, or Dumuzi the shepherd, is unique among the pre-flood kings. He is not only a name on a prism, but a presence in myth. Songs recall his beauty, his love for the goddess Inanna, his tragic fate. He was no distant figure of eternal rule, but one whose story touched human emotions, love, grief, death, and hope. The myths tell us that when Inanna, queen of heaven, descended into the underworld, she was trapped there. To escape, another had to take her place. Dumuzid was chosen, tied and dragged into the depths. He became the substitute, condemned to live below for half the year. But every spring he returned, bringing with him renewal and life. Thus he became the model of the dying and rising god. The shepherd whose loss and return mark the cycle of the seasons. In this, Dumuzid is unlike Alulim, Alalgar, or Enmen-Galana. They are remembered for cosmic stability. He is remembered for vulnerability. His story is about change, about descent and rebirth, about the certainty of loss and the promise of return. To the people of Sumer, his myth was lived in ritual. Women wept for him each year, mourning his descent and rejoiced at his return in spring. The farming cycle itself was tied to his fate. The parallels are global. Osiris in Egypt, killed and resurrected as lord of the afterlife. Baal in Canaan, descending into death before returning with the rains. Even later in Christian tradition, Jesus is remembered as the good shepherd who dies and rises again. Across cultures, the pattern repeats. Dumuzid stands at the root of this type, one of the earliest remembered shepherd kings whose story echoes in religions for thousands of years. But in the king list, Dumuzid is still a king. His reign numbered with precision, 36,000 years. His myth and his mathematics sit side by side. Was he truly a ruler who lived across ages, later remembered as a god? Or was he always a symbol? His kingship a story told to embody the cycles of life and death. The clay tablets do not decide. They leave us with both. A king of 36,000 years and a shepherd who dies and rises again. From the Anunnaki perspective, Dumuzid could represent a different role in the legacy. If the earlier kings embodied creation, law, and knowledge, Dumuzid embodied the cycle of renewal. Perhaps his myth is a memory of the Anunnaki's promise that what is lost can return, that destruction is never final. Or perhaps his story hides something darker, a record of sacrifice, of rulers taken and returned, of deals with powers we no longer understand. Imagine living under Dumuzid's reign. To the people their king was eternal, shepherd of both flocks and souls. They mourned him and welcomed him year after year as though his presence moved between the world of the living and the dead. In him they saw that kingship was not only about order or knowledge but about the deepest rhythms of existence, death, loss, and rebirth. When his reign ended, kingship did not remain in Bad Tabira. It was moved once again, this time to Larak, a city now lost to time. After Dumuzid, kingship moved to Larak, a city whose name survives only on clay, yet whose walls have never been found. The Sumerian king list tells us that Ensipat-Zidana reigned there for 28,800 years, 8 sars, the same cosmic measure as Alulim and Enmen-Galana. But while Eridu and Bad Tabira left ruins we can uncover, Larak remains hard to find, a shadow in history. Where was this city? Scholars have long debated. Some place it near the Tigris, north of the other Sumerian centers. Others suspect it was destroyed by floods or wars, its remains buried too deep to recover. And some propose that Larak may not have been a physical city at all, but a symbolic one, a place of judgment, memory, or power that existed more in myth than on earth. Ensipat-Zidana himself is equally unclear. The prism records his name, his city, and his years. Nothing more. No myths of battles, no hymns of love, no tales of journeys. Silence surrounds him, as though his role was simply to hold kingship steady through the ages. And yet this very silence gives weight to his reign. It suggests that what mattered was not his deeds, but his guardianship of Larak, the forgotten city. Some ancient sources hint that Larak was connected with Ninurta, a god of law, healing, and war. If true, then Ensipat-Zidana's reign may have symbolized judgment and balance, the care of crops and fields, but also the upholding of cosmic justice. His 28,800 years would then represent not victories or tragedies, but the steady pulse of law and order across ages. From another perspective, Larak could have been one of the 5 pre-flood cities named in Sumerian tradition, sacred centers established before the flood. If Eridu was wisdom, Bad Tabira craft, Sippar astronomy, and Shuruppak survival, then Larak may have been balance, a point in the network of divine kingship. Ensipat-Zidana's reign then was about maintaining balance, a role too subtle for myths but too important to forget. From the Anunnaki viewpoint, the mystery of Larak may not be accidental. If these beings had centers of power on Earth, some may have left no trace, hidden, erased, or deliberately concealed. Ensipat-Zidana's long rule could reflect the presence of such a hidden base, a place remembered only in name because its reality was never meant to be uncovered. Imagine what it felt like for the people. They lived in a city whose memory has since vanished, ruled by a king who lasted for thousands of years. Generations came and went, and still Ensipat-Zidana sat upon the throne. To them he was eternal, his silence proof of divine constancy. To us he is a ghost, a name without a story, a king without a city. When his reign ended, kingship moved again, this time to Sippar, where Enmen-Durana would be remembered as the king who was taken into heaven. But before we leave Larak, its absence stays, a lost city, a forgotten king, a reign of 28,800 years preserved in clay but erased from earth. After Ensipat-Zidana, kingship passed to Sippar, the city of the sun god, where Enmen-Durana reigned for 21,000 years. His name is carved in the Sumerian king list, but unlike many others, his story is remembered in later tradition. He was the king who did not die but was taken into heaven. The number of his reign, 21,000 years, nearly 6 sars, is huge, but shorter than those who came before him. Yet his uniqueness lies not in years but in destiny. Where Alulim embodied beginnings, Alalgar stability, Enmen-Luana fire, Enmen-Galana wisdom, and Dumuzid resurrection. Enmen-Durana embodied rising. Later Mesopotamian law links him with Utu, the sun god, and with Shamash, lord of justice. He was said to have been taught the arts of telling the future, reading the stars, the patterns of oil and water, the movement of clouds. These were not superstitions, but sciences hidden in ritual, ways of finding order from chaos. To be chosen for such knowledge was to be marked as more than mortal. The comparisons to the biblical Enoch are striking. Genesis records. Enoch walked with God. Then he was no more because God took him. Just like Enmandarana, Enoch was remembered not for dying but for being lifted. Both were linked to heavenly knowledge, astronomy, prophecy, divine law. Two traditions far apart yet echoing the same mystery. A man taken into the sky crossing the line between human and divine. Sippar itself supports the story. Excavations reveal it as a major center of sun worship with temples devoted to Shamash. Tablets from the site contain careful star lists, calendars, and records of eclipses. Was this the legacy of Enmandarana's reign? Did his rise mark the origin of such astronomical traditions? Perhaps what the ancients remembered as revelation was the transmission of knowledge from heaven to earth. From the Anunnaki perspective, his story reads even more literally. If the heavens were not metaphor but sky, then to be taken up may mean transport carried away by beings with the power of flight or craft. In this view, Enmandarana was chosen by the Anunnaki, lifted to their place, taught, and returned as a carrier of knowledge. His reign of 21,000 years might then represent not just longevity, but the lasting presence of their guidance. For his people, the effect would have been deep. Imagine living in Sippar, knowing that your king had touched the heavens. He returned with wisdom of the skies, with the laws of the sun, with justice that seemed to shine with divine light. His rule was not only governance but revelation. Generations would have looked to him not merely as king, but as go-between between humanity and the cosmos. The silence of the clay prism is telling. It lists his name, his city, his years, and nothing more. Yet the echoes from myth fill in the rest. Enmandarana was not remembered for conquest or temples, but for rising. His story is one of transformation of a man who crossed the boundary and brought back light. When his reign ended, kingship moved once more to Shuruppak, where Ubaratutu would be the last king before the flood. But Enmandarana remained unique among the eight. He is the one who did not simply rule. He rose, and so his legacy lasts in clay, in scripture, in myth. A reminder that kingship was once not only earthly but heavenly, that some kings were not meant to die but to rise. After Enmandarana, kingship moved to Shuruppak, where Ubaratutu ruled for 18,600 years. His reign is remembered not for its length but for being the last before the flood. The final chapter of an age that had lasted 241 years. Shuruppak is not a lost city. Its ruins still lie on the banks of the Euphrates, and archaeologists have uncovered layers of clay and mud that tell a scary story. Around 2900 BCE, the city was hit by a huge flood. The layers show normal living, homes, tools, pottery suddenly stopped by meters of river mud. When the waters went down, people returned, but the world was no longer the same. The evidence matches the line from the king list. Then the flood swept over. Ubaratutu himself is silent in the tablets. No deeds, no hymns, only his name, his city, his years. But he is remembered as the father of Ziusudra, the Sumerian Noah. When the gods decided to destroy humanity with a flood, it was Ziusudra who was warned, told to build a great boat and preserve the seed of life. Thus, Ubaratutu's line carried humanity through the waters. The comparisons are clear. In the Atrahasis epic, the survivor is Atrahasis. In Gilgamesh, Utnapishtim, in Genesis, Noah. Different names but the same story. The flood, the ark, the renewal of life. Ubaratutu stands at the threshold of this tale. The king who reigned while the skies gathered, while judgment drew near. What did it mean to be the last pre-flood king? For nearly 200 centuries, rulers had reigned as if immortal. Generations lived and died under their steady watch. But with Ubaratutu, the cycle was about to break. His reign of 18,600 years was shorter than those before him, as though time itself was getting smaller, preparing for the end. Songs were sung of his strength, of his friendship with Enkidu, of his battles with monsters. He was both human and more than human, mortal and yet divine. His story echoes because it shows the human struggle with mortality. Where his pre-flood ancestors lasted for ages, Gilgamesh faced death and could not overcome it. And in this, he is closer to us. Some researchers suggest that Gilgamesh's role in the king list is important for understanding its purpose. The early names, they argue, are echoes of the Anunnaki age. But with Gilgamesh, the line crosses into provable history. He is the anchor, the proof that the list is not myth but memory, a document that links our world with a forgotten one. From the perspective of the Anunnaki legacy, Gilgamesh may represent the last thread of divine blood. His quest for immortality may reflect a longing for the ages before when kings lived for tens of thousands of years. His failure shows the final cutting of that link. After him, kings would be mortal. The age of gods walking among men was truly over, and yet the memory persisted. The clay tablets of the epic were copied for centuries. His name was called in rituals. His story was told and retold. He became not just a king but a myth, a symbol of the human condition. In this way, he achieved the immortality he sought not in body but in memory. Imagine Uruk at its height. Huge walls gleaming in the sun, temples rising to the sky, scribes pressing clay with styluses, priests chanting hymns. At its center, Gilgamesh, a man who was 2/3 divine, 1/3 human, wrestling with the limits of life. His people saw in him both the glory of the old age and the reality of the new. Through him, they remembered what had been lost in the flood, and they lived forward into what was to come. And so the king list continues beyond him, listing rulers with reigns we can cross-check with archaeology. History becomes clearer, yet the shadow of the pre-flood kings remains. The flood may have swept over, but the legacy of 200 years still stays. In the scriptures, long ages stay, echoing the long lifespans once recorded in Sumer. Adam is said to have lived 930 years, Noah 950. Methuselah, the longest lived of all, reached 969. These numbers, though extraordinary, mirror the patterns we have already seen in the Sumerian king list. They suggest that memory of extended lifespans did not vanish with the flood, but carried into the traditions of later peoples. The Book of Genesis presents a world in which humanity once lived far longer than today. From Adam to Noah, lifespans are counted in centuries, not decades. After the flood, however, the years begin to shrink. Abraham lives 175 years, Moses 120, and finally the Psalms declare the years of our life are 70, or by reason of strength 80. The pattern is clear. Long ages before, shortened lives after. It is the same pattern preserved in the king list, though squeezed in different ways. This raises questions. Were these numbers symbolic, representing dynasties or tribes? Or were they, as the Sumerians suggested, literal lifespans of a world now lost? Scholars debate, but the comparisons are too exact to ignore. Both Sumerian and biblical traditions remember an age when humans lived far longer, and both mark a flood as the turning point. Modern science adds another layer. In 2013, researchers studying DNA made a surprising discovery. A man named Albert Perry, an African American from South Carolina, carried a Y chromosome family line unlike any other found before. Genetic analysis suggested that his line traced back 338,000 years, nearly twice as old as the oldest known fossils of Homo sapiens. The finding shocked scientists. It suggested that humanity's story is deeper, stranger, and more ancient than previously thought. If DNA can preserve family lines older than our fossil record, then perhaps myths too preserve memories older than our written history. Perhaps the Sumerian king list, with its reigns stretching back 200 years, reflects not fantasy, but distant memory, a genetic memory written into clay. The Bible itself recognizes a shift. In Genesis 6:3, God declares, "My spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh. His days shall be 120 years. This verse appears just before the flood story. It is as if longevity itself was taken away, lifespans deliberately cut. Was this symbolic, a religious statement? Or does it preserve memory of a real change in human biology? Some suggest environmental reasons. Before the flood, conditions may have been different. The atmosphere, the radiation, the climate. Others suggest genetic intervention. If the Anunnaki were involved in shaping humanity, perhaps they once allowed longer lives but later shortened them either as punishment or as control. The myths of long-lived ancestors from Sumer to the Bible could then reflect this deliberate shift. Even outside Mesopotamia and Israel, traditions remember long-lived ancestors. In India, the yugas describe ages when humans lived for thousands of years. In China, ancient emperors were said to rule for centuries. In Egypt, the first dynasties are given reigns far longer than later pharaohs. Everywhere, the memory of an age of longevity continues. Science, myth, and scripture come together in a scary question. Did humanity once live longer lives? And if so, what was lost? The discovery of DNA family lines older than Homo sapiens suggests that our origins are not as simple as textbooks once taught. Perhaps multiple family lines of humans once lived together. Perhaps some were guided, shaped, or changed by forces beyond. The king list may then be more than a list of kings. It may be a record of bloodlines, some human, some divine, some hybrid, stretching back across ages. The phrase Anunnaki legacy echoes here. If these beings once mixed with humanity, their lifespans, their genetic traces may still echo in us. Royal family lines across history have often claimed descent from gods, dragons, or stars. In medieval Europe, kings were called blue bloods. Some researchers suggest this phrase reflects an ancient memory of bloodlines different from ordinary humans. Copper-rich blood, bluish in color, was once associated with reptilian or divine beings in Mesopotamian law. Is this a coincidence or a fragment of the same story? Whether symbolic or literal, the thread is unbroken. The Sumerian king list, the Bible, the myths of many lands, all preserve a memory of long lives before the flood and shorter lives after. All remember a boundary, a change, a loss. Imagine living in that age. To see centuries pass, to know the great-grandchildren of your great-grandchildren. To watch cities rise and fall within your own lifetime. The world would feel different. Time itself would feel different. Perhaps this is why the ancients described their early kings not as men, but as beings closer to gods. And yet the flood came and something ended. Afterward, lives were shorter. Kingship continued, but rulers no longer lived for tens of thousands of years. The divine closeness seemed taken away. Humanity entered a new phase, one we still live in. But the memory stays in scripture, in DNA, in myth. It is the echo of a legacy that may still flow in our blood. The legacy of the Anunnaki, whose presence once stretched human lifespans, whose leaving left us with only centuries, whose story is written not only in clay, but in the double helix of ourselves. And so we move toward the next chapter of the king list, past the flood, past Gilgamesh, into the realm of theories and interpretations. Among them, one name comes up again, Zecharia Sitchin, who dared to say the words aloud, that the Anunnaki were not symbols, but beings who came from a distant world to shape our destiny. In modern times, one researcher dared to read the Sumerian tablets in a way few scholars accepted. His name was Zecharia Sitchin. In the 1970s, he published The 12th Planet, claiming that the Anunnaki described in ancient texts were not symbols or myths, but living beings. Visitors from a distant world called Nibiru. To Sitchin, the Sumerian king list was not allegory. It was memory. It was history written in clay. Sitchin argued that Nibiru was a huge planet on a long oval orbit, one that takes 3,600 years to circle the sun. In the language of the Sumerians, this cycle was called a sar, the same unit that measures the reigns of pre-flood kings. 8 sars, 10 sars, 12 sars. To Sitchin, this was no coincidence. The reigns of thousands of years were not exaggerations, but reflections of the lifespans of the Anunnaki measured in their own planetary cycles. According to his interpretation, the Anunnaki came to Earth hundreds of thousands of years ago, seeking gold to repair their atmosphere. They found it here in abundance but needed labor to mine it, so they turned to early humanity. Through genetic engineering, they changed primitive hominids into workers, the first humans. Kingship then was the order they put in place. Alulim, Alalgar, and the others were not mere mortals but hybrids, chosen go-betweens, rulers appointed to govern humanity in the name of their creators. In this reading, the Sumerian king list is a record of Anunnaki oversight. The long reigns represent their own lifespans or their direct rule. The flood was the moment of reset when much of their experiment was washed away. Afterward, their presence got smaller, lifespans shortened, reigns got shorter. Kingship became human rather than divine. Yet their influence stayed hidden in myths, religions, and royal family lines. Critics of Sitchin dismissed his translations as guessing, his astronomy as flawed. Mainstream scholars accused him of bending texts to fit his theory. Yet his ideas captured the imagination of millions. Perhaps his silence reflects helplessness. Did he know the flood was coming? Did he stand powerless as waters rose? Or did he rise like others before him, leaving his son to survive. The king list does not say. It simply closes the age with one stark phrase: the flood swept over. From the Anunnaki perspective, Ubaratutu represents withdrawal. If the earlier kings embodied their presence on Earth, then his reign marks their leaving. The flood was not just a natural disaster but a reset, a deliberate erasing of an age that had run its course. Afterward, kingship continued, but in human terms. Longevity shortened, rulers became mortal, and the gods moved back into memory. Yet even in this ending there is continuity. Through Ziusudra, life lasted. Through stories carried across generations, memory lasted. Ubaratutu's reign became the hinge between two worlds. The last of the immortal kings, the first father of survivors. Imagine Shuruppak as the waters rose, temples swallowed, fields drowned, families holding onto rooftops. And somewhere in the city, the last king of the old age ruled, knowing his reign would be the final one. His silence in the tablets is fitting. It is the silence of dusk before a storm, the stillness before the flood. With him the age of 200 years ended. After him began the world we know. Shorter reigns, mortal kings, history that archaeology can trace, but his place lasts. A serious reminder that every civilization has its threshold and every age its end. Then the flood swept over, and with it ended an age unlike any other. The Sumerian king list, so precise in naming rulers and years, breaks its rhythm with this simple line. No explanations, no extra details, just a boundary. 8 kings, 200 years, and then silence, water, and the beginning of something new. The flood is one of the most lasting myths of humanity. In Sumer it is tied to Ubaratutu and his son Ziusudra. In Babylon, to Atrahasis. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, to Utnapishtim. In the Bible to Noah, in Greece to Deucalion, in India to Manu. Though the names differ, the theme is the same. A world-ending flood, a chosen survivor, and a rebirth of humanity. Archaeology lends weight to these stories. Excavations at Shuruppak and other Mesopotamian sites have revealed layers of mud, deposits left by huge floods around 2900 BCE. These layers stop the normal sequence of living, suggesting sudden disaster. For those who lived in the land between rivers, such a flood would have seemed total, drowning fields and cities alike. Memory turned disaster into myth and myth into scripture. Yet in the Sumerian king list, the flood is not only a disaster, it is a dividing line. Before the flood, kings reigned for tens of thousands of years. After the flood, reigns became shorter, hundreds, then tens, then mere decades. It is as if time itself was reset, squeezed, made smaller. The long ages of the pre-flood kings never return. Why this change? Some see it as symbolic. The flood marks the end of the mythical age, the beginning of historical memory. Others suggest something more deep. That before the flood, conditions of the earth or the presence of the Anunnaki allowed for longevity. After the flood, something changed. The climate, the genetics of humanity, the presence of the gods themselves. The Bible echoes this idea when it says, "My spirit shall not contend with man forever, for he is mortal. His days shall be 120 years. Longevity was cut short deliberately as if by command. In the story of Ziusudra, preserved in fragments, the god Enki warns the king of Shuruppak of the coming flood. Build a great boat, he is told, and preserve the seed of life. Ziusudra obeys, survives the flood, and offers sacrifice once the waters go down. The gods, moved by his obedience, grant him eternal life. His tale is the earliest version of Noah's Ark carved in clay centuries before Genesis. Imagine the flood through their eyes. The skies darken, rains fall without end, rivers overflow, walls crumble, families huddle on rooftops as waters rise. Temples vanish beneath the waves. Animals cry out. Silence follows, broken only by the lapping of endless water. In that silence, the old world is gone. When the waters go down, only fragments remain. A few survivors, a few stories, and the memory of a world that once was. From the perspective of the Anunnaki legacy, the flood may have been more than punishment. Some thinkers suggest it was a reset, a deliberate erasing. Perhaps humanity had grown beyond the control of its makers. Perhaps divine and mortal blood had mixed too much. Perhaps an experiment had gone wrong. The flood then was a cleansing after which kingship would continue, but on a smaller scale. Humanity would no longer live in the shadow of immortal kings. This pattern echoes across myth. In nearly every tradition, the flood is followed by a covenant, a promise, a new order. Noah receives the rainbow. Deucalion repopulates the earth with stones. Manu preserves the seeds of all life. Ziusudra is granted immortality. The flood is never the end. It is the threshold, the crossing from one world to another. For the Sumerians, the flood separated the age of gods from the age of men. The 8 great kings who reigned for 200 years belonged to the first world. After the flood, rulers like Gilgamesh would belong to the second. The king list preserves this division with stark clarity. Before ages beyond imagining, after reigns we can verify. The flood is the border between myth and history. Yet perhaps the flood is not only in the past. Myths warned that cycles repeat. Just as the ancients remembered one great flood, they also whispered of future ones, of resets that come again and again. In this sense, the flood is both memory and prophecy, a reminder that civilizations rise, fall, and are washed away, leaving only fragments for the next to find. As the waters go down in the story, humanity begins again. Cities are rebuilt, kingship continues, but everything is different. The gods are more distant. Lifespans are shorter. The age of Anunnaki kingship is over. Yet its shadow stays, preserved in clay, in scripture, in memory. The flood did not erase the legacy. It marked it forever. And so the king list continues. New kings are named, their reigns measured in centuries instead of thousands of years. Among them Gilgamesh of Uruk, whose presence bridges myth and archaeology. With him begins the world we know, the world after the flood. But the memory of the great flood lasts. A line of clay that reads simply, "Then the flood swept over," a boundary between two worlds, one of gods, one of men. After the flood, kingship started again, but everything had changed. The reigns were shorter, the gods more distant, the ages squeezed. The Sumerian king list, which once spoke of tens of thousands of years, now began to measure reigns in mere centuries, then decades. The world of immortal kings was gone. In its place rose rulers whose names and deeds could be traced in clay, in stone, in ruins we can still uncover. Among them stands one figure above all, Gilgamesh of Uruk. Gilgamesh is the bridge between two worlds. He appears on the king list as a post-flood ruler. His reign measured not in thousands of years but in 126 years. And yet he is also the hero of one of humanity's oldest surviving epics. A king who sought immortality, who journeyed to the ends of the earth, who met the survivor of the flood itself. His presence confirms that the king list did not invent its later names. It preserved memory. Gilgamesh was real. Archaeologists have uncovered the city of Uruk with its huge walls and temples, its writing tablets and artifacts. The epic poems that bear his name describe him as 2/3 divine and 1/3 human, a blend of mortal and immortal. He was remembered as a great builder, a mighty warrior, a seeker of secrets. His story, carved in cuneiform, still whispers across 4,000 years. The contrast between Gilgamesh and the pre-flood kings is sharp. Where they reigned for tens of thousands of years, he ruled little more than a century. Where they were remembered only by names and numbers, he is remembered in detail. His journeys, his grief, his wisdom, where they seemed eternal, he struggled with mortality. His very quest in the epic is to escape death, a quest he ultimately fails. Yet in his failure, he reflects our own human condition. Gilgamesh's meeting with Utnapishtim, the Sumerian Noah, ties the worlds together. In the epic, he seeks out the one man granted immortality after the flood. Utnapishtim tells him the story of the flood of the boat, of the gods' decision to reset the world. Gilgamesh listens, hoping to learn the secret of eternal life. But he is told that immortality is no longer for mankind. The age of long-lived kings has ended. For men, there is only the span of human years. This moment captures the change written on the king list. The end of the divine age, the beginning of the human one. Yet Gilgamesh's divinity cannot be ignored. 2/3 god, 1/3 man. His family line hints at the mixing of Anunnaki blood with human. Perhaps he is a leftover of the old age, a final echo of rulers who were more than mortal. His reign, though shorter, may mark the blending of legacies, the immortal kings of before, the mortal rulers of after. Uruk, his city, reflects this blend. Its walls are said to have been built under his command, stretching for miles. Archaeological remains confirm huge fortifications, huge architecture, and improvements in writing and administration. This was no mythic city. It was real, powerful, advanced. The king list places Gilgamesh firmly in the line of kings after the flood, reminding us that myth and archaeology need not be separate. For the people of Uruk, Gilgamesh was not just a king, but a figure of awe. Readers around the world found in his books an explanation for the strange things of ancient history, the sudden rise of Sumer, the advanced knowledge of the stars, the strange precision of the king list. To them, the Anunnaki idea was not crazy. It was the missing piece. Sitchin also connected the Anunnaki to the great stories of humanity. He linked them to the Nephilim of the Bible, the mighty men of old. He saw in the myths of gods and demigods traces of their presence. He suggested that humanity's longing for the divine was not only spiritual, but family-based, a memory of the beings who once walked among us. If his theory is true, then the king list becomes not a mythological puzzle but a record of contact. The names Alulim, Alalgar, Enmenluana, Enmengalana, Dumuzid, Ensipadzidana, Enmendurana, Ubaratutu. These are not just kings. They are chapters of an Anunnaki legacy, rulers who showed the presence of another world. Their lifespans beyond understanding to us were natural to them. Their transfer of kingship from city to city was the hand of heaven moving across the earth. Imagine the world through Sitchin's lens, a planet Nibiru with a long orbit, beings arriving in ships of fire, settlements founded, mines dug, cities raised, humans created, uplifted yet bound. Kings appointed to help, to govern, to maintain order. Ages passing, reign stretching into tens of thousands of years. And then the flood, whether natural or deliberate, sweeping away much of what had been built. Survivors carrying fragments of knowledge into the new age. Humanity remembering but dimly. Even if Sitchin's details are debated, the questions he raised remain. Why do so many traditions remember long-lived rulers? Why do myths around the world speak of gods descending from the sky, teaching humanity and then leaving? Why do numbers in the king list line up so neatly with cycles of 3 to 600? For many, the Anunnaki idea provides sense. It explains the sudden rise of civilization in Sumer. It explains why the earlier cities appear fully formed with writing, mathematics, and law already advanced. It explains why kingship is described as descending from heaven, not growing from tribes. It explains why the flood appears in every tradition as if it were a shared hurt of a world reset. And whether one accepts Sitchin's literal claims or not, his work forces us to face the mystery of the king list. To dismiss it as fantasy is easy. To read it as allegory is safer. But to take it seriously, to ask whether it records something real, is to step into a realm where the past is stranger than we admit. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in between. Perhaps the Anunnaki were not gods from beyond the stars, but memories of an advanced civilization lost in disaster. Perhaps the long reigns are not lifespans, but epics of forgotten dynasties. Or perhaps, as Sitchin believed, they were truly beings from another world, and their legacy flows still in our myths, our blood, our very sense of kingship. In any case, the king list remains. Its names last, its numbers unsettle, its simple line about the flood divides time itself. And in the background the Anunnaki loom. Whether as gods, ancestors, or visitors, their legacy is written in clay and carried in story. As we near the end of this journey, one question remains. What is the legacy of those 200 years? Did the Anunnaki truly rule? And if so, what did they leave behind in us? From clay tablets to questions, the Sumerian king list leaves us with more mysteries than answers. 8 kings, 200 years, then the flood. Afterward, reigns got shorter, names became human, and history as we know it began. But the memory of that earlier world, when kingship descended from heaven, when rulers reigned for tens of thousands of years, still stays, carved into clay and whispered in myth. What are we to make of it? Were the pre-flood king symbols, or were they real? Did they show cosmic cycles? Or did they show flesh and blood beings whose lifespans exceeded ours? The tablets themselves are quiet. They simply list, yet in their silence they bring up questions that echo across centuries. The legacy of the Anunnaki, whether as gods, ancestors, or visitors, is not only in numbers. It is in the structures of kingship itself. The idea that rulership is given, not earned, that authority descends from above, that cities rise and fall by divine command. This way of thinking shaped Mesopotamia, Egypt, Israel, China. Indeed, nearly every civilization. Even today, traces remain in phrases like divine right of kings or mandate of heaven. The shadow of kingship descending from heaven has never quite left us. If we read the king list literally, then we are forced to imagine a time when humanity lived alongside beings of huge longevity, beings who guided, ruled, and perhaps even created us. Their reigns, 8,800 years, 36,000 years, 43,200 years, stretch our imagination, but line up neatly with the Sumerian unit of the Sar. Was this simply mathematics or a way of preserving lifespans we cannot understand? If we read it symbolically, the questions do not vanish. Why did so many traditions across the world preserve the same idea? That once life was longer, closer to the divine, and that a flood cut that age from ours. Why does the Bible echo the same pattern from Adam's centuries to Moses' 120 years? Why do Hindu yugas, Egyptian king lists, and Chinese records all tell of long-lived rulers followed by shorter ages? It is as if humanity remembers a boundary, a squeezing, a loss. From a scientific perspective, the mysteries deepen. DNA studies suggest family lines older than our fossil record. Ancient monuments appear with knowledge of astronomy beyond what we assume possible. Cities like Eridu and Uruk rise suddenly with writing, law, and architecture fully formed. The king list may not explain these strange things, but it lines up with them. It suggests that civilization did not rise slowly, but was given just as the tablets say. From the perspective of Zecharia Sitchin, the Anunnaki are the key. They came from Nibiru, put in place kingship, created humanity, and ruled for hundreds of thousands of years. The flood ended their direct rule, but their legacy remains in our myths, our religions, and perhaps our very blood. Critics may question his translations, but the questions he asked remain impossible to avoid. Why are the numbers so exact? Why do myths across continents come together? Why does the king list blend myth and provable history without hesitation? Imagine for a moment that the tablets speak truth, that kingship really did descend from heaven, that the first cities were founded under the watch of beings from beyond, that for 200 years, humanity lived under rulers whose lives spanned ages, and that one day a flood swept it all away, leaving only fragments, clay tablets, oral stories, scattered memories for us to puzzle over. What would that mean for us now? Are we the children of gods or of men or of both? Is our history one of independence or one of inheritance? And if kingship once descended, could it descend again? The orbit of Nibiru, if it exists, would bring its visitors back in cycles. Some believe we are nearing such a cycle now. Others say the Anunnaki never left, but rule invisibly through institutions, through bloodlines, through the very systems of kingship they established long ago. And yet perhaps the greatest legacy is not control but memory. The king list does not force belief. It invites wonder. It whispers that our past is stranger than we imagine, that our origins are deeper than textbooks admit, that our story may be part of a far larger one. From clay to scripture, from myth to DNA, the thread runs unbroken. The long-lived kings before the flood itself sweeping away an age, the shorter lives after. The echoes in Gilgamesh, in the Bible, in every corner of the world, and behind it all the shadow of the Anunnaki. As we close this journey, one truth remains. The Sumerian king list is not just a list. It is a mirror. It reflects both what we know and what we have forgotten. It challenges us to see that history may not be a straight line, but a spiral looping back on itself, carrying echoes of worlds before. Perhaps we will never know whether Alulim Alalgar Enmen Luana Enmen Galana Dumuzid Ensipad Zidana Enmen Durana and Ubara Tutu truly reigned for hundreds of centuries. Perhaps they are types or myths or memories blurred by time. But the question stays, what if they were real? What if we are not the first civilization, but the latest chapter in a story that began long before us? The clay tablets are silent now, but their silence is not empty. It is an invitation to listen, to wonder, to remember. And so the legacy of the Anunnaki remains not in monuments or thrones, but in the questions that refuse to fade.